The wind screamed through the valley like a wounded animal, clawing at the old wooden cabin buried beneath the snow. Inside, Eleanor pressed another log into the weakening fire, her hands trembling as the flames hissed and shrank. She could feel the cold creeping through the cracks in the walls, slipping into her bones like an unwelcome memory. The blizzard had come without warning, swallowing the sky and silencing the world beyond her frosted window. She pulled her shawl tighter, staring into the fire as if the glowing embers might speak back to her. The room was filled with the sound of nothing, the kind of silence that hums against your chest, reminding you you're still alive. Once, this place had echoed with laughter, her husband's soft whistle, the distant bark of their old dog. Now, only the storm kept her company. A single tear slipped down her cheek before she even knew it was there. She wiped it away, angry at herself for feeling so small. "You're stronger than this," she whispered, her voice barely rising above the wind. Then she heard it, faint, uncertain, a soft scratching against the door. Her heart stilled. The sound came again, fragile but real, cutting through the storm's roar. Eleanor froze, every sense awake. Was it the wind playing tricks, or someone out there? She rose slowly, the firelight trembling across her face. For the first time in years, the silence had broken. Have you ever spent a night so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat? Tell me in the comments if you've ever felt that kind of silence. For a long moment, Eleanor stood frozen, her breath clouding in the chill. Maybe it was just the wind, she told herself, an old woman's mind playing tricks again. But then the scratching turned into a sound she hadn't heard in years. A whimper. Low, trembling, desperate. Her pulse quickened. She shuffled toward the door, her bare feet brushing across the cold wooden floor. Each step made her heart pound louder than the storm itself. With trembling fingers, she unlatched the door. The wind roared in, a blast of white fury. Snow swirled into the cabin as Eleanor shielded her eyes. And there, collapsed on her porch, were 4 German shepherds. Their bodies were stiff with ice, their fur clumped with frost, eyes glassy but still pleading. "Oh, dear heavens," she whispered, dropping to her knees. She could see their ribs through their thick coats, could feel the faint rise and fall of their shallow breaths. Without thinking, she reached out, her hands brushing against one muzzle. Warmth flickered beneath her touch, faint but alive. She knew she couldn't leave them there. Yet as they twitched and whimpered, she noticed something eerie. Their movements weren't random. Even in weakness, they shifted together, like soldiers obeying a silent command. Eleanor's breath caught. These weren't ordinary strays. But right now, they were freezing. What would you have done if 4 dogs showed up at your doorstep in the middle of a storm? Eleanor didn't think twice. One by one, she lifted the frozen bodies from the porch, her frail arms trembling under their weight. The storm clawed at her back as she carried each shepherd inside, setting them gently by the fireplace. Snow melted instantly, forming little rivers across the wooden floor. The fire hissed and crackled, the warmth fighting to claim the room again. She tore old quilts from the cupboard, the ones her husband had loved, and wrapped the dogs tightly. Their whines were faint, the sound of exhaustion and pain blending with the sigh of melting ice. "Easy now," she murmured, kneeling beside them. "You're safe here." Her voice cracked, the words foreign on her tongue after years of silence. From the stew pot simmering on the stove, she ladled warm broth and bits of meat into a shallow bowl. One by one, the dogs stirred, noses twitching, eyes half opening with fragile hope. They ate in slow, trembling motions, tails barely flicking with life. Eleanor watched, her chest tightening with something she hadn't felt in decades: purpose. The fire painted soft gold across their fur, the glow reaching her lined face. One of the shepherds, the smallest, lifted its head and placed it gently on her knee. The simple trust in that gesture broke her completely. Her lips curved into a smile she hadn't worn in years. The storm raged on outside, but within those four walls, warmth returned, and with it, the quiet beat of belonging. She didn't know it yet, but her life was shifting in ways she could never imagine. By dawn, the storm had lost its fury. The world outside her cabin lay buried under a perfect white hush, untouched and still. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of smoke and damp fur. Eleanor sat in her old rocking chair, watching the four shepherds sleeping by the fire. Their breathing rose and fell in unison as though following an invisible rhythm. When she stirred, they did too, heads lifting together, eyes alert, but calm. She blinked, startled by their discipline. Even the way they ate felt rehearsed, not one lunged or fought for food. They waited for her nod, then moved as though they understood. "Well," she murmured, smiling faintly, "you've got better manners than most people I've met." She tested them with a soft whistle. 4 ears pricked at once. The smallest tilted its head, as if awaiting her next command. Eleanor chuckled under her breath, though the sound carried an edge of wonder. These were no wild strays. They'd been trained, and trained well. But by who? When morning light spilled through the frosted windows, she pulled on her boots and stepped outside. The cold bit hard, sharp and clean. Behind the cabin she froze. In the snow, faint tire tracks curved toward the forest, half buried but fresh enough to see. Someone had been there not long before the storm hit. Her gaze drifted to the treeline, the silence pressing heavier now. The dogs shifted restlessly behind the door, sensing her tension. Eleanor frowned, her breath misting in the morning air. "Do you believe animals can sense danger before we do?" The night had settled thick and heavy, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound. Eleanor dozed in her chair, the fire burned low, painting the room in dim gold. Then a sound shattered the quiet, a low, steady growl. Her eyes snapped open. All four shepherds stood rigid, facing the window. Their ears were pinned forward, bodies tense, muscles quivering beneath their coats. "What is it, boys?" she whispered, but they didn't move. The smallest let out a soft rumble, teeth barely showing. Then, through the frost-covered glass, a pale beam cut across the trees, headlights sweeping slowly back and forth. Eleanor's breath caught. She crept toward the window, careful not to creak the floorboards. Outside, shadows moved against the snow, 2, maybe 3 figures, flashlights slicing through the dark. Their voices were low, lost under the hum of the wind. One beam of light drifted over her cabin wall and lingered. The dogs didn't bark. They only watched, utterly still, waiting for something unseen. Eleanor's heart pounded against her ribs. Her hand found the latch on instinct, then froze. What if they weren't here for the dogs? What if they were here for her? The fire flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the walls. She could feel every breath of the cold pressing through the glass, every second stretching thinner. Outside, the lights turned again, moving closer. Eleanor sank to her knees beside the dogs, whispering, "Stay quiet." Their eyes glowed in the dim light, unwavering, ready. The snow outside shifted with footsteps. Someone was coming. Would you hide them, or open the door? The first knock came like a gunshot against the wood, sharp, echoing, final. Eleanor jolted upright, her pulse roaring in her ears. Another blow followed, harder this time, rattling the hinges. "Ma'am, open the door." A man's voice bellowed over the storm. She stared at the door, breath shallow, the sound too real to ignore. The dogs moved instantly. No hesitation, no confusion. They spread out in front of her, shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the entrance. Their growls were low and controlled, the sound of warning, not fear. Eleanor's heart stuttered. Who trained them to do that? Through the frost-veiled window, she caught a glimpse of dark shapes, men in heavy coats, flashlights cutting through the snow. One beam caught a glint of metal. Guns. Her knees nearly gave out. "Who are you?" she shouted, her voice trembling, but the wind swallowed it whole. Another pounding knock shook the cabin. "Ma'am, we mean no harm. Please open the door." The tone was urgent, commanding, but something about it made her skin crawl. The shepherds barked once, in unison, deep and fierce. The men outside froze, their lights flickering across the walls as they began circling the cabin. Shadows moved past each window, boots crunching against the snow. Eleanor's gaze darted between the door and the animals standing guard. Her trembling hand hovered near the latch, torn between fear and instinct. The dogs never moved, their bodies forming a living shield between her and the unknown. Outside, another voice shouted, "Closer now." The knocking returned, louder, relentless. The fire snapped, sparks rising like startled birds. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the cold metal latch, her breath catching in her throat. The first light of dawn crept through the frost, turning the snow outside to gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep it hummed in her ears. Eleanor stood by the door, her body stiff from a sleepless night. The dogs still guarded her, eyes alert but calm, their breath fogging the air. Then came the sound, distant engines, crunching tires, voices cutting through the stillness. She pulled back the curtain. Police cars. Dozens of them. Red and blue lights flickered against the snow, casting shadows across her cabin walls. For a moment, she couldn't move. It was as if the world outside had shifted without her consent. The dogs stirred, tails stiff, heads lifting as if they understood. A sharp knock echoed. "Ma'am, this is the police. Please open the door." Eleanor's trembling hand found the latch again. This time, she pulled it open. The cold hit her first, then the sight of the officer standing before her, tall, face drawn with fatigue, snow dusting his uniform. His gaze dropped instantly to the four shepherds sitting beside her, silent and poised. "Ma'am," he said gently, lowering his voice, "those dogs, they're not strays." Her brows knit in confusion. "Not strays?" "They're part of AK-9 Special Operations Team. They went missing last night during an active mission, search and rescue training. We tracked their beacons. They led us straight here." Eleanor looked down. The dogs sat perfectly still, their eyes on her as if awaiting her command. Relief flooded her chest, followed by something softer. She reached out, brushing her hand along one muzzle. "You came home," she whispered, voice breaking. The officer smiled faintly. "Instinct, ma'am. They're trained to seek warmth, safety, trust. And somehow they found all three with you." Eleanor's eyes glistened as the morning light filled the cabin. She hadn't rescued them. They'd rescued her from her silence, her loneliness, her forgotten self. Can you believe animals can find their way back to safety like this? It's almost like fate. The cabin felt too quiet again. The officers moved efficiently, their boots thudding softly against the wooden floor as they clipped leashes onto each shepherd's collar. The metallic clicks echoed in Eleanor's chest like tiny goodbyes. She stood near the hearth, hands clasped, trying to steady herself. Less than a day, that was all it had taken for her house to feel alive again. Now the warmth seemed to drift away with every breath. One of the shepherds whimpered, resisting the gentle tug of its handler. Its eyes darted to her, uncertain. Another settled stubbornly by her chair, tail giving a weak thump against the floorboards. Eleanor's lips trembled into a fragile smile. "It's all right," she whispered, kneeling to stroke their fur. "You're going where you belong." The commanding officer paused, watching the scene. His tone softened. "Ma'am, Without you, they might not have survived the night. You gave them more than shelter. You gave them a chance." Her throat tightened, words caught somewhere between pride and grief. She nodded, tears bright in the firelight. "They gave me something too," she said quietly. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed." The officer gave a respectful nod before signaling his men. The dogs hesitated, glancing back one last time. The smallest pressed its nose against her hand before being led out into the snow. Eleanor stood in the doorway, the wind tugging gently at her shawl. Pride swelled beneath the ache in her chest. The silence returned, but this time it didn't feel empty. The snow began to fade with the turning of the season, leaving behind soft earth and the first fragile hints of green. Weeks had passed since that morning, yet Eleanor still caught herself listening for the quiet padding of paws by the hearth. The cabin felt different now, lighter, warmer, as if the memory of those 4 shepherds had left something glowing in the walls. One afternoon, as the sun spilled through her window, she found an envelope resting on her porch. The handwriting was neat, official. Inside was a photograph, 4 German shepherds, coats shining, sitting proudly beside their handlers. Each wore a small badge on its collar. Beneath the photo, a handwritten note read, "They never forget you." Eleanor's hands trembled as she traced their faces with her thumb. A soft laugh escaped her, watery and full of love. She carried the photo to the mantel and set it carefully beside her husband's picture. For a long moment she stood there, the 2 frames catching the afternoon light, one memory old, one new. The house, once silent, seemed to hum with quiet life again. She could almost hear the faint thump of a tail, the echo of trust, the warmth of belonging. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room, smiling through her tears. "Have you ever helped someone who changed your life in return?" Morning sunlight spilled gently across the valley, turning the melted snow into silver streams that whispered along the path. Eleanor stepped onto her porch, breathing in the quiet air, her shawl drawn close against the lingering chill. The world felt soft again, at peace. But then she noticed them, paw prints, fresh and clear, leading right up to her door. She frowned at first, blinking against the light. The trail came from the woods, perfect impressions pressed into the damp earth. Forceps. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she followed them with her eyes, half expecting to see movement beyond the trees. There was nothing, only the rustle of branches and the song of a distant wind. Then, faintly, somewhere in the distance, came the sound of barking, strong, proud, familiar. Eleanor's lips curved into a trembling smile. "You found your way back," she murmured, her heart swelling with a warmth words couldn't hold. She stood there a while longer, the breeze brushing her cheeks, the prints glistening like a promise. Maybe kindness never really disappears. Maybe it simply travels, through storms, through hearts, until it finds its way home again. Eleanor turned her gaze outward, as if looking beyond her porch, beyond the mountains, toward unseen faces across the world. Her eyes gleamed softly as she whispered, "Sometimes, the smallest act of care can ripple farther than we'll ever know." She smiled, the morning light wrapping around her like an old friend. "And I love seeing how far these stories travel. Tell me, where in the world are you watching from?"